lot of you have been to rapid reviews before, but I'll just go over what we're going to do. If you picked up one of these sheets, oh, go ahead. We're going to review them in this order, which is basically alphabetical by author's last name, because we are librarians after all. And I am gonna time them, but you know, the chime will go off, and please finish whatever thought you're in the middle of. We're not gonna be too strict about it. And at the end of rapid reviews, anyone here can check out any of the books. With a couple exceptions, I had to recall a couple books, and I promised to get them back to the people who I stole them back from. So there are little notes on the two that I need to get back to the people. If you want either of those, or if someone beats you to a book that you really wanted to read, any of the librarians here can help you put it on hold, and that means you'll get an automated email when it gets checked back in, so you'll be the first person who can check it out afterwards. All right, let's see. Okay, and then if reviewing books looks really fun to you and you're going to be around next semester, just let me know and you can be a reviewer yourself. And what that means is you can give us your list of 6 to 10 all-time favorite books, and we'll buy any of the ones that we don't already own, and then you can be part of the panel next semester. So just let me know if that's of interest to you. So let me introduce our reviewers. There's Courtney, who not only is a student at Marlboro, but also works in the library and who cataloged a bunch of these books.
and makes books.
What's that?
And makes books.
And makes books, yeah.
Wait, how do you know that?
Phil knows everything. Emily, our illustrious library director. Steve, a staff accountant, with I'm sure many additional talents. And Kat, sociology professor, there we go. And Phoebe Lumley, another student here. So one of the things I've done in the past is let the reviewers spend a minute talking about something they've noticed about the stack of books that they've put together, or give us any background information about your choices as a whole, if that makes sense. And you can pass on this if you want to, or if it seems like a fun thing to do, you can do that. So, Courtney, you want to share any thoughts about your collection?
Well, I was trying to go for like a really diverse stack of books. Because I didn't want to just like have all novels or anything, so I have all sorts of cool things like recipe books and like making things books, and there's an abolition books and novels. So it's a pretty and kids books too. So it's a diverse stack of books.
I get unacceptably anxious anytime I'm asked to name my favorite anything. It's just too much to handle. So these aren't my 10 favorite books ever. It's a mix of old favorites and ones I've read recently and just feel like talking about. So that's my guiding principle.
That's good.
And same with Emily, not necessarily my 10 all-time favorite books, but you will notice an underlying theme in a lot of them. And I did throw in some fiction just to make it sound like I'm well-read.
I tried really hard to get a diverse group of books, but it turns out all the books that I came up with this goal in mind are either like super nerdy fantasy books or books about subcultures, which apparently are my only 2 interests, so we'll see what happens.
Mine are exclusively fiction, and I wanted to get a diverse range as well, and they're sort of diverse. There are some things that I loved growing up, and there's some things that I've loved more recently, and everything in between.
Cool. Thank you. One of the things we noticed at the library is there are a bunch of groupings, so that there's times when one reviewer is reviewing 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 books at the same time. So if you want any flexibility with time, like if you want 2 minutes just to review 2 books together or something like that, just let me know. Cool. All right.
We have Steve at the end with 5 books.
Yeah. I'm going to put them all together.
Yeah.
All 5.
Wow. Good luck with that. All right. So I think we're starting off with Phoebe.
So this is The Wolves of Willoughby Chase by Joan Aiken, which is a book that my mom first read to me when I was growing up, and I later read to myself. It's the first in a fabulous series that's set in England in the 1800s, and it's terribly fun, lots of adventure, orphans, shipwrecks, kidnappings, evil governesses, and about the connections that we build within our families and with our friends. It's really a lot of fun, and it's sort of historical, vaguely, but doesn't really ram it down your throat, so I always appreciate that. And I have 3 in a row, so I'm just going to keep going.
Okay.
So the next one is another book from my childhood, The Complete Collection of Thomas the Tank Engine, which is an absolutely fantastic book, and it was the only thing I checked out of the library in my hometown for I think probably the first 10 years of my life. And I take it out once every month or so, and it's amazing. It's just got these incredibly charming stories, beautifully illustrated, and it's actually extremely factual in terms of the history of the railroad. And looking back on it now, it was written by the Reverend W. Awdry, and there are a lot of religious themes that I really did not catch onto when I was younger, so that's a fun thing to discover going back and reading it. But it still holds all of its charm for me years later. And then the last in my trio is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. And this is one of those books that everybody tells you to read because it's fabulous and it's a classic, and it actually is as wonderful as everyone tells you it is, which was an amazing surprise for me when I first read it. And it was the first classical book that I remember reading and getting that incredibly magical feeling of recognizing people that I know within a story that was written decades and decades before I was born. And that the insight that humans don't really change all that much over time is both scary but also incredibly heartwarming and brought me really close to an author who, of course, I could never possibly meet.
Cool. All right, I think I'm next up. So I feel a little bit of compunction recommending this book to people because it's one of the most devastating books I've read. It can really do a number on you. It's called North American Lake Monsters, and it's a collection of short stories by Nathan Ballingrud. I was reading an interview with him before this, and he said something to the effect of, I want to write pieces that hurt, and he really did. So the first story I read in here just hit me like a truck at the ending. It was the most emotional impact I've ever had from anything I've read. And you keep thinking the next story can't possibly be this bad, and it is. It just keeps going and going. So I don't necessarily recommend this if you're in any sort of fragile state or needing some sort of comfort. But if you want to take on something just beautiful writing and really compelling, I'm glad the library got this one. All right, next up is a book called The Mummies of Urumqi by Elizabeth Barger, who is an anthropologist who specializes in textiles. And this book is about mummies that were found in Western China in the 2nd and 1st millennia BC. And among the things found in with them are these plaids that are remarkably similar to plaids found in the salt mines of Austria that were of Celtic origin. So we have these people with these plaids who are, the mummies are also 6 feet tall, have red hair and blue eyes, and the craziest clothes. They have like striped, bright wool knee socks and 2-foot-tall felt hats that are cone-shaped and loud, clashing clothes. So these people live in an area where there is an Indo-European language spoken called Tocharian. That comes about a millennium later, but that's a language I studied in graduate school. And the big mystery is, are these people the Tocharians? So Elizabeth Barber brings in lots of textile evidence and analysis, and also some linguistic evidence. And a cool thing about Tocharian is it's way farther east than you would expect to find an Indo-European language. Is that just one, or is that all 3?
That's just one.
Okay.
That's a good book right there.
Yeah, this one was going to be my hardest one because there's a lot packed in there, so I'll move on. Okay, so next up, The Outermost House, which is by Henry Beston, who was a nature writer in the early part of the 20th century. He spent a year on a beach at Cape Cod Nauset Beach, which is on the Outer Cape, in 1926 and 1927. He lived all by himself in a cottage he built for himself. And he just recorded the passing of the seasons, the sort of changes in flora and fauna that came and went as the seasons went on, his solitude, the occasional encounters he'd have with Coast Guard people, shipwrecks off the shore, all kinds of stuff written really beautifully and kind of dispassionately, but beautifully. And there's an account in here of herring trying to come back to the pond where they were born to spawn, which is what herring do, and being blocked from doing so by a natural dam that had formed. And just the account of their sort of bewilderment of, this is what they're programmed to do and they can't do it was really moving. So that's a highlight of this book.
Oh goodness. All right, so my first book is Nevada by Imogen Binney. And this book is about, on the back it says it's a darkly comedic story of Maria Griffiths, a young trans woman living in New York City. But it's a lot more than that, and I think that it's a very, I hate to say authentic, but it's just a lot of books about trans people aren't often written by trans people, and this is a trans author who wrote a wonderful book that doesn't end all tied up in a bow. It's definitely not the ending left me sort of feeling a bit lost, but I think that's because life does that sometimes to people, and that it doesn't tie up neatly in a bow, and that it's just a really great story talking about trans experiences. Not for everyone, obviously, but for some people. So, there you go. Aha! My timer is doing its work.
So this is The Firebrand by Marion Zimmer Bradley. She's also the author of The Mists of Avalon, which is about King Arthur sort of time. And it's in the same style as that, but I actually like this one better. She does sort of a feminist take on a retelling of the Iliad from the point of view of Cassandra, who's the daughter of King Priam of Troy. And it's really engaging. Her characters are just excellent, and I love how she takes on this persona of Cassandra who just isn't believed with any of the prophecies that she's telling, and carries that through.
Bill Bryson, a short history of nearly everything. So there is some things that are left out in this. If you've read Bryson, such as A Walk in the Woods, you know you're in for a fun time anytime you read anything he writes. The whole premise behind this book, just like all of us, Bryson had questions, things in nature, things in science. A big question is why? Why this? Why that? How do we know this? So what he set out to do is talk to experts, find out why. And it's fun science. Not saying that science is boring, it just makes it a lot of fun. And starting with the Big Bang, creation of the universe, through the solar system, earthquakes, volcanoes, you name it, through the rise of life. And then a real interesting part for me was the whole chapter on genetics. You'll get through this one really fast if you haven't read it already. And it's quick.
So this is probably my favorite of the stack. This is Who Are You People? A Personal Journey into the Heart of Fanatical Passion in America by Sherry Cauldron. And she becomes obsessed with subcultures and what makes people in these various different subcultures obsessed with them. And so she spends a bunch of time living with people who are obsessive ice fishers, or just captivated by Josh Groban, or really into Barbie. And she has a whole section on people who are into Mayberry, and they have these Mayberry Day festivals. And she sets out to discover what her passion is, and by the end of the book she realizes that her passion is studying other people's passion. And I was so obsessed with this book that I emailed her and said, you just wrote the book I've always wanted to write. And she emailed me back and was like, oh, you should write that book, and I would like to one day. You should read it.
Okay, so this book is called The Decipherment of Linear B. It's another sort of historical linguistics-y book. So in early 20th century, they discovered a whole bunch of clay tablets on Crete and in southern Greece with an alphabet that was unknown up to that point. And this is the story of both the decipherment of that alphabet and also the person who deciphered it, Michael Ventris, who is a sort of self-taught archaeologist and linguist and just a brilliant guy. And so you get sort of the story of the kind of de-encryption of the language and the alphabet. Everyone thought maybe it was Etruscan at first. They weren't sure what it was. It turned out to be a dialect of Greek that was about 600 years older than any Greek we had up to that point, and told us all kinds of fascinating things about the history of Greek. So really, really cool book. Maybe not terribly for the lay person, but there's another book that came out recently about a woman named Alice Cober, who did a lot of this decipherment and hasn't gotten a lot of credit. And that one I haven't read, I hope to, but it looks a lot more accessible maybe than this one.
Next on my list is by Professor David Christian. It's called Maps of Time, An Introduction to Big History. Now, I believe it's the History Channel just had a series called Big History where they make a lot of connections with things from the past and how it relates to the present. What Christian does in this book is, starting with the Big Bang, the first seconds after creation, he goes through these thresholds, and he really ties in different disciplines into one coherent whole, starting with cosmology, into astronomy, geology, chemistry, biology, and then of course with leading to human history, which again he ties in as all one history. Seeing that we are the only life forms that we know about, he felt it made sense to include us in a big history narrative.
No, go ahead.
That's okay.
So read this.
Okay. You should also read this. This is The Secret Chimneys by Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie wrote an incredibly large number of books, and all of the ones I've read, not all of them, are fabulous. She has a real eye for people, and what she's really known for is her ability to concoct these fantastic plots that keep you guessing right until the end. But she really thinks so much about why people do things, and that's what keeps drawing me back to her work. This particular one contains international espionage, jewel thieves, princes in disguise, murder, police detectives, hidden documents, lots of fun stuff, crazy English country house, very, very crazy party. So it's a lot of fun and just incredibly engaging.
This covers it very exciting, but this is The Road from Crewain by Joel Kirk-Conway, and Joel Kirk-Conway was the first female president of Smith College, which is, I guess, the third theme in my books is Smith College. And she writes about her life growing up in the outback in Australia, and it's really a very interesting, it's a memoir, really interesting sort of tale of how she grew up on a working farm and became interested in women's education. And has these sort of threads of feminism all throughout it, but at the same time is a really compelling story of her own life.
Oh, me. Right, so this is Are Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis. Angela Davis is like big on the prison abolition scene, and she's an amazing author. This is basically like a beginner's guide to prison abolition, I would say. So like if you've already read a lot, you've probably already read this. But it's a wonderful book that if you know nothing about prisons, it really like exposes the racist and sexist underpinnings of the American prison system and the American justice system, and talks about New Age slavery and sort of like introduces you into this whole subject of prisons, which not a lot of Americans are aware of. So there you go. Read it.
Next for me is Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. This won the Pulitzer Prize, I believe, back in '97. It truly is a fantastic book. For me, the first few chapters, it was a little slow, but what Diamond does is, again, why do some societies, and that is the subtitle, The Fates of Human Societies, why do some have so much today and others so little? And he really goes on a 13,000-year journey to explain the answer to that question. which I'm not going to give away. It's really worth reading, but he touches on many things. But I will say that geography has a little bit to do with it. So, that's me again. Well, similar to the last book, Brian Fagan, The Long Summer, How Climate Changed Civilization. He does much of the same thing that in the Holocene now, what's the epic that we're in? Geologically, really because of the great warming that we experience now for the last 10 to 15,000 years has allowed civilization to rise and flourish. He also goes on to mention a lot of things. One thing that stood out for me was the creations, the Noah's flood story, and how the rapid rising of the Black Sea probably is what gave rise to that story, along with the flooding in the Euphrates and Tigris Valley. This is a fantastic book too, and he talks a lot about next year. 2 minutes.
Oh, it's me again. So here we have The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. It's Neil Gaiman's newest book, I believe, unless he's made a new one in the last few months, which is possible. Neil Gaiman's a pretty famous author, and I love most of his works dearly. And The Ocean at the End of the Lane is a sort of take on fairy tales, but it's from it's a narrative. It's from a first-person perspective of this little boy who, at the beginning of the book, you realize has grown up, and it's sort of talking about what he remembers when he goes to visit his childhood, where he grew up during his childhood. And it's kind of scary, as all good fairy tales are, for me at least. I like a little bit of scariness in there, and it's very real, like a very real fairy tale. So I definitely recommend reading it, even if you haven't read Neil Gaiman before, and if you have, you should read it, definitely, because if you like Neil Gaiman, you'll love this book.
So this is Pattern Recognition by William Gibson. And I don't read a lot of science fiction, but I just fell in love with this author. And he's been writing for quite a while, and he got really well known in the 80s, and he was writing about the internet before almost anybody else was, and how we as a culture began to interact with this whole new world. This particular book is the first in his most recent trilogy, and it deals with a woman whose father was killed in 9/11, so there are the repercussions of that echoing through the whole story. And it also looks at the commercialization of art, particularly in the film industry. And he is an author who writes incredibly compelling and fascinating female protagonists, which I was really surprised and delighted to find in a male science fiction writer. So it's also really, really funny. He describes things in a way that just makes you stop and turn and sticks with me always.
Great. So this is, as you've probably heard, I do make books, and this book is one of the first books that I really started to use as, I guess it taught me a lot, is what I mean to say. It has a lot of really basic forms that you can start off with and make your own books. So it's definitely something that is great for the summer if you have time, vacation time over the summer, and you like crafts. And you want to create your own books, because the possibilities are endless once you get started, and this sort of helps you get started on the road to bookmaking.
So Juno and Juliet by Julian Goff, I think is how you pronounce that, is a book about a pair of identical twin sisters in England who go off to college together and live in a flat. And it's really funny and bright and sharp and explores sister relationships, but also just the process of figuring out who you are once you move away from home for the first time and what direction you want to take with the rest of your life. So it's very funny and it's very bright, but it also has a lot of heavier issues that all the characters are dealing with.
Okay, my next book is called The Teammates. It's by David Halberstam, and it's the story of a very long friendship among four men who played for the Boston Red Sox in the 1940s. Ted Williams, Johnny Pesky, Dom DiMaggio, and Bobby Dorr. And the premise of the book is that it's 2001 and Ted Williams is in Florida dying, and two of the teammates, Johnny Pesky and Dom DiMaggio, along with a local Boston celebrity named Dick Flavin. I don't know how he worked his way in there, but they decide to make a road trip from Massachusetts to Florida, and they're all in their 80s at this point. So they drive to Florida and reminisce, and David Halberstam learned about the road trips in 2002, I think, but he then interviewed the surviving teammates and just captured a lot of great stories of their time playing together and then beyond. They remained friends their whole lives. Ted Williams has some of the saltiest language you'll ever encounter, so if you enjoy that, this is a good But yeah, it's just a picture of baseball in another era when, players were not millionaires and they were sort of regular people, and beautiful, beautiful story. Okay, next up is Catch-22. So how many of you have read Catch-22? Yeah, some of you have. So it's obviously a very brutal picture of war, but what I think of it as is kind of a handbook or manual through the absurdity of bureaucracy. So if you've ever worked in a very large organization, for example, you'll read this book and things will just immediately click with you and you'll be like, yeah, I recognize that. So the premise in this one is, it's written from a number of points of view, but there's the main protagonist is a bombardier in World War II, stationed on an island off of Italy, and he's trying very hard not to be killed by his superiors by flying more and more missions. And there's just some fantastic writing, some fantastic characters, some very funny names in here. And Snowden is sort of key in this book, the name Snowden. So when Edward Snowden recently made his revelations, that really sort of clicked here. Okay, my third in a row. So I think it's great that Kat already mentioned Cassandra, because I'm going to talk a little about Cassandra and reviewing the Little Droop family. So in the Agamemnon, which is one of Aeschylus's plays, he has Cassandra say, "O men, your destiny, when all is well, a shadow can overturn it. When trouble comes, a stroke of the wet sponge and the picture's blotted out." And that, I think that breaks the heart. And this is the opposite of that. So the Little Droop family are living an absolutely terrible existence. They're miserable, they fight all the time. Mama cooks a sand and gravel porridge every morning that they eat, but they hate it. No one says please or thank you because it's not delicious. But then eventually, the sort of opposite of what Cassandra was describing happens when baby Droop is out wandering in a field. He comes across a little good feeling that attaches to him and comes home with him, and it spreads, so they go from a sort of miserable existence to a happy existence. And I agree with Bonnie, the first half's better. The miserable British half, but really amazing pictures in this book. Lillian Hoban, if you guys are familiar with her, really good book, so I recommend that one.
Okay, so this is The Managed Heart, the commercialization of human feeling by Arlie Hochschild. And Arlie Hochschild is the author of The Second Shift, which some of you may have read. And The Managed Heart is my favorite of Arlie Hochschild's work. She's a sociologist, and in the 80s she was interested in emotional labor, the way that people have to induce or suppress emotions as part of their job. And she does this study of flight attendants on Delta Airlines and looks at how they create a feeling in the cabin and the toll that takes on them. And she also looks at bill collectors and how they have to sort of suppress sympathy for people in order to do their jobs. And it has all these implications in terms of us being a big service economy now, which sounds totally dry, but it's so fascinating. And if you've ever worked a service job, I think this really resonates. Or if you've ever worked for Disney World, this really resonates there too. Excellent book. Alright, this again, I guess the cover's not so exciting, but it's The Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs, which has one of these huge titles. But Jane Jacobs is a journalist who was wandering around New York City in the 70s and trying to understand how the built environment shapes the way that people behave. And it's such a brilliant insight into what makes for a successful social gathering space. And she's writing this as a journalist, so she has a different take on it than perhaps a sociologist, but the kinds of things that she sees as being successful in a public park or in a gathering space really rail against the kinds of architectural designs that people were putting into place, and that are still putting into place. So it's fun if you are traveling to New York City this summer and you read this book as you're going there. You can, some of the same, structures that she was writing about then are in place now, and you can see how they worked. Okay, one more. So this is another nerdy science fiction book. Mercedes Lackey, the Free Bards trilogy. And Mercedes Lackey is a really prolific fantasy author who I was really into in high school, and she wrote a lot of different sort of trilogies of these different lands, and this one is about these musicians who are sort of in an ancient fantasy land, and they're dealing with the corruption of the church, and they're trying to sort of incite a revolution through their music, and it's really compelling. She has these different sort of fantastical creatures who, through their music, are sort of discussing some of the themes around corruption that have all these sort of similar parallels today if you look at bureaucracy or government, and they're writing about this in this fantasy context, so it's pretty excellent.
Okay. So this is Cat Wings, and it's the one children's book that I chose to review. It's part of a 4-book series by Ursula K. Le Guin. I think it's the only kids book she ever wrote. But if you've ever read any Ursula K. Le Guin, her kids books are just as good as her novels. And we read this one in my cottage. We read this one for story time, because we have story time, because we are adults, and that's what adults do. They drink tea and read stories, and at least my kind of adult. And this book is just about these 4 little cats that are born with wings and set out and explore the world, trying to figure out where they fit in it. And it's lovely, and the rest of the books are lovely too, and I'm hoping to donate the rest to the library this year. So thanks. Surprise. There you go. Okay, next one. So this is Let Me In, and this is by a Swedish author. If you've heard of Let the Right One In, that's a movie that was based upon this book. Let the Right One In is a fantastic movie. The book is even better, but I love both of them. They're both dear to my heart. I would recommend you read the book, even if you haven't seen the movie. It's wonderful, and it's about this boy who is bullied and alone and very disconnected to the world, meeting this vampire who looks about his age. And the vampire in itself is more of a genderqueer character in the book than it's really talked about in the movie. And that made me pretty pleased. But he's got great writing. Its only warning is that there is some reference to more pedophilia and rape in this book than there is in the movie. So just be aware of that if that's something you can't read about. But if you can, I definitely recommend reading it.
This is Tori Murden McClure, A Pearl in the Storm. And Tori Murden McClure is a Smith alum who was the first woman to row across the Atlantic Ocean in a rowboat, which is insane. She's also the first woman and the first American to travel overland to the South Pole. But this is just about her journey across the Atlantic, and it's one of those feel-good books. I can't even actually believe I liked it so much, but I really did. It was very inspiring. And she talks about how she gets halfway across and doesn't make it the first time, and then she has to go back and try again, and makes it the second time. And it's one of those sort of I can't believe anybody could do this kind of books.
Okay. So this is Northeast Foraging. I love this book. Specifically, I requested this one for my rapid reviews because it's right around our area and it's perfect time to start foraging. This book sets it out into 4 different seasons. Well, actually 5, because there's beginning of spring and then the end of spring, which are 2 very different foraging seasons. And then you have summer, fall, and winter. Yes, you can forage in the winter too. It's pretty great. And it tells you all of these different things about the plants, also medicinal uses, that sort of stuff. The way it's sorted isn't the best, but it has an index so you can find things pretty easily. And I used it to go forage this weekend, and it was amazing. And I cooked up a lot of ostrich fiddlehead ferns to eat, and it was great. So So I recommend this if you love foraging, or if you want to love foraging.
So this is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, and this is just an incredibly fun and gripping read. I got it out of my hometown library and drove home, opened up the first page in the car, and 2 hours later was still there reading. It's just so much fun, a wonderful thing to read if you just had a stressful semester. It's got magic and circuses and a little bit of a confusing time frame, but it's pretty fascinating. And there are continual surprises around every corner. It all builds to a very intense and satisfying ending.
So I have another one that's maybe not the best thing to read if you've just had a stressful semester. Not too big on the feel-good reads. So this is Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. It's one of his, it's atypical for him in that it doesn't sort of deal with the magical realism for which he's known. It's a fairly literal account of an undergraduate coming of age in Tokyo in the 1960s, late 1960s, and it's almost like distilled sadness, this book. It's extremely sad. It deals with this young man and his relationships with two different women, each of whom have been through a lot of trauma and each of whom deal with it in extremely different ways. One of the things I love about this book is it features a sanitarium that reminds me of, it's sort of the Marlboro of psychiatric institutions. It's on a hill in the middle of nowhere, and there's sort of a self-directed approach to therapy. And every time I read this book, I think, gosh, this sounds familiar. But anyway, again, very sad, can be upsetting, but beautiful, beautiful book.
This is the Audubon Society Field Guide to the Night Sky, and I first bought this book in 1991, and I was hooked ever since then on Audubon field guides. One of many that I have. Get a blanket, and the summer's coming up. Little red flashlight, so your night vision doesn't go away, and open up to the month here and the direction you're looking in, and then refer to the constellations, pick them out, and just enjoy yourself. One thing I'll add though, one thing that I really enjoy about this is the mythology of the constellations, and it always fascinates me how, especially with Orion, how different cultures who probably never had any contact with each other saw the same things in the sky. Always fascinating.
Oh, it's me, oh gosh, okay. So this is The Bird Artist by Howard Norman, an author who I really love. He wrote this book about a rather odd young man named Fabian Voss in Newfoundland in around 1911, and it's the story of Fabian, his girlfriend Margaret Handel, who's one of my favorite characters in literature ever. She's very hard drinking, likes to go out and shoot ducks with her revolver. Sometimes she shoots other things with her revolver. She rides her bike a lot, including when she's under house arrest. She rides her bike in the house. And it's the story, I'll give away the sort of, well, on the first page it gives away the fact that Fabian shoots the lighthouse keeper and kills him, and that's sort of, the book is an account of that and his parents' dissolution of their marriage as his mother takes up an adulterous relationship with the lighthouse keeper, and a sort of quirky cast of characters in Newfoundland, lots of sort of maritime charm. And I think this book comes down just on the right side of not being too precious. Some people might find it a little too precious, but I thought it did okay. It walked the line. Okay, so nice novel to read. Okay to read if you're upset with me. No. Actually.
I really love that book. This is 7 Types of Ambiguity by Elliot Perlman, which I found my first year of college and just fell totally in love with. It has a bunch of different sections that are each narrated by a different person, and you dive into it and have no idea what's going on, and then the stories start to weave themselves together, which is really beautiful. But it's set in Australia. It has lawyers, kidnappers, prostitutes, cheating spouses, some upsetting content definitely, but a really fascinating look at people and what ends up mattering to you most when it really comes down to language and an incredible gift for images.
Okay, so this is a book by Terry Pratchett. I don't know if any of you here have read Terry Pratchett, but okay, some people have. He's an amazing author. I love him dearly. He's a very prolific author. A lot of his stuff contains, it's humorous, punny stuff. This book in particular is maybe not the best introduction to his Discworld novels, of which there are like over 37 of them, I believe. I haven't read 37 of them, I've only read about 10. But they fit into each other very nicely, so sometimes it's hard to get into the series. But this book takes place into like the Duchy of Borogravia, which is not a place that he's really talked about before, so it's a good introduction in that it doesn't talk about a lot of characters that have been introduced before. So I really love it. It's about a bunch of people going off to try and find themselves, and also, oh my goodness, I'm running out of time, it's talking about like geopolitics and gender politics within like an army, and I enjoyed the humor in it very much. I'm done.
It's too much. So this book is by Brian Raftery. It's called Don't Stop Believing, How Karaoke Conquered the World and Changed My Life. And it's another story of somebody sort of coming to find and understand themselves through in-depth study of the subculture, which is apparently my theme. And he gets really interested in karaoke cross-culturally and travels to all these karaoke bars all over the world, and is kind of it's a hilarious book, and he's sort of wondering, you know, what is it about singing in public badly in front of all these other people that like brings people together, and he comes to find that, you know, it's really well, I won't give it away, but it has a lot of meaning, and he also talks about the universality of journey, which, you know, Don't Stop Believing Journey, which I thought was, you know, a really nice sort of sub point that he made throughout the book, was that journey is really forever. Oh, it's me again. Okay. Well, I have lots to say about this. This is a book of poetry. I don't really know what you say about a book of poetry, but it's my favorite book of poetry in the world. It's called Dark Fields of the Republic by Adrienne Rich. And every poem in this book is more beautiful than the one before. Adrienne Rich is my favorite poet, and she just died recently. But very, very prolific. She writes pretty much a book of poems a year. And these are her poems from 91 to 95, and they have just, I don't know how you review poetry, but it's excellent. I should have looked at poetry.
I have a book of poetry too.
Oh, good.
So this is the selected poetry of Maria Rilke. And have any of you taken the BuzzFeed quiz about are you an intolerable intellectual? You've seen that one. Well, there are questions in it. There's a little sequence of questions. Have you ever learned a language so that you could read a work in the original? Was that language French? Was that author Camus? Sequence leading you down a path. And Rilke definitely inspired me to learn German. I read his poetry in English first and found it incredibly beautiful and wondered, you know, what it would sound like in its original. So I did learn German in part by that. This particular edition is a popular one. It's translated by Stephen Mitchell, and I remember back when I was in French class learning French so I could read Camus, I had an argument with one of my classmates about this book. He thought Mitchell's translations were too precious, his word. I think they're fine. I think they're great. So I'm clearly an intolerable intellectual, and I apologize. I think that's my last review.
All right. Thank you for getting this, by the way.
No problem.
This is the 6th edition of J.M. Roberts, who has now passed away, The History of the World. It is all in this book right here. Now, I have a paperback, so, you know, it's a lot smaller. But what to really say about this book is that Roberts doesn't really focus so much on individuals as he does themes, and I think that's probably the only way you would be able to put the entire history of the world between two covers. 1976 was the first year, and really it's, again, along the theme of a lot of my books, I like themed history. The details are great, but really I enjoy themes, big picture, and this book is full of it. And if you get through some of the more fun books here and have more time, definitely pick this up.
So this is a cookbook called Vegan Eats World. It's obviously a vegan cookbook. I'm vegan, so it's very exciting when there are great cookbooks out there to teach you how to cook delicious, nutritious meals. This is by Terry Hope Romero, who's like really famous on the vegan cookbook scene. I don't know if you've heard of like Vegan Cookies Take Over by Cookie Jar or like Pie in the Sky. She's co-authored that with Isa, what's their name? Yeah, the other big famous person on the vegan cookbook scene. This one has 300 international recipes for savoring the planet, is how she puts it. And I think, oh, they're so amazing. My favorite section is the curry section. I love curries from all around the world. And a lot of these are actually things that you can just make without having to get specialty ingredients, which is awesome. There are some, of course, that are a bit more complicated, but a lot of times people are like, oh, I can't make international food because it's really hard to get the ingredients. But with this one, it's actually quite easy. And the dessert section is amazing.
This is crafted by Curtis Sittenfield, and this is a really hilarious book about a girl from a middle-class family who goes off to private prep school for high school, and how she deals with the new subculture of being in a private school and dealing with sort of a rapidly, like a totally different social class than the one she grew up in. So there's the themes of sort of an all-girls boarding school going on there, but also themes of social class that I think she captures really well, and it's just a hilarious book.
This is my last one. This is by Allie Smith. This is called There But For That, which I just think is a fantastic title. And it's a really amazing story about a guy named Miles who's at a dinner party with people he doesn't know very well. He was brought by a friend of a friend. And right before dessert, he leaves the dining room and goes upstairs and locks himself in the guest room and won't come out for 7 months. And it's hilarious and just utterly bewildering. And everyone's trying to figure out why Miles won't leave. They end up calling an ex-girlfriend from middle school of his to try and come talk to him, and he doesn't talk to him in 30 years. And a little girl in the neighborhood starts sending him messages. It's all of these different characters touching each other's lives in really small, heartbreaking little ways, but ends on a mostly positive note.
Okay, so this is my last book. It's called Wandering Sun. It's by Shimura Takako, and it's one of the only manga, which is like, I guess some people call them like Japanese comic books. I wouldn't quite say that, but I'm a nerd. So Wandering Sun is one of the only mangas that talks about trans kids growing up, like that sort of thing. Trans people in general aren't really talked about in a lot of Japanese literature or in comic books. So this book talks about two main characters, trans. Their names are Shuichi. Oh gosh, darn it, names going too slow. Nitori Shuichi and Takatsuki Yoshino, and it's like following their lives. The only problem I have is with the translation, because they get their pronouns wrong in the introductions. And the person who translated this book, shame on you, because the whole point about it is talking about, growing up trans and all that sort of stuff. And he really should have gotten their pronouns right in the introduction. But other than that, it's a great read.
Okay, these are my last 5 books.
Take it away, Steve.
All right, I'm going to combine, Bonnie,
Yeah.
the two by Colin Thuban.
Okay.
Colin Thuban really, as far as travel narrative go, he is incredible. His use of the English language and his knowledge of history is amazing. So one is in Siberia, the other is Shadow of the Silk Road. In Siberia, he is going west to east. In in Shadow of the Silk Road, he's going east to west. So, with both books, he has a great eye for the landscape and the way he describes it. He also, ordinary, everyday people in these two books really come to life through his descriptions, and he spends time with them. In Siberia, 6,000-mile journey. Shadow of the Silk Road, 7,000-mile journey. And he did pass by the Mummies, by the way. But he is fascinating. Both of these were, if my lack of a good review doesn't sway you, New York Times both picked these as fantastic books of the year. So check those two out. Next is Lord of the Rings. How many people have read Lord of the Rings? The whole thing. The whole thing. Okay. So I'm not going to get into any details, but what I will say about it, what I find is that this is probably the best backpacking book I've ever read. And if you want to know how to prepare stewed rabbit, it's in here. No, but it's, to me, what I take away from it is life gets very hectic for all of us, and this kind of brings you back, although the journey was very perilous, to a simpler time when people were more in touch with the earth, more in touch with nature. And just the descriptions, of course the movie helps, but the movie did a very good job, of the different areas, the different lands that they enter, they just stay with you. And gosh, I'll probably read it again after this. So, but yeah, the best backpacking book ever. Again, another book that just about everybody in here probably has read. The movie that came out a couple years ago I thought was really good, but it really was just for people who have already read the book. Otherwise, you probably didn't know what was going on. I never read Tolstoy before this book, and I heard a lot about him and read a lot about him, but he truly is the master of the human condition. I was going through a difficult time when I read this personally, and it was very comforting to know that a lot of the thoughts, emotions, feelings, I'm not the only one who ever experienced them. Everybody in this book experienced something, and again, I can't remember who it was, but just about with Pride and Prejudice, the classics truly are classics for a reason. Whether it's 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, we're all human. We still experience the same thing. So, and the last one is Richard Yates' Revolutionary Road. This was also a movie, I think maybe 5 or 6 years ago, with Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet. This book was written in 1960, and Yates had a really good feel of the pulse of post-World War II America. And I guess John Kenneth Galbraith also wrote a book called The Age of Anxiety, or Affluence and Its Discontents. And it's about a young couple who live in suburbia outside of New York, and it's just that question of is there more to life than going to work every day and buying a house in suburbia and starting a family. And what they find out is it's not so bad after all, but there unfortunately at the end are tragic consequences. And so it's a little sad at the end. So again, like you said, it's not a book if you had a difficult semester to read right away. So, and I'm sorry to end with that one.